All right, Miami Dolphins are next in the AFC East. Another team, the offseason. Yeah, how do we beat good teams? Like these weird questions that are difficult to answer. You just have a better team. Step up in big games. How do you beat good teams? How much of the offensive success is the playmakers versus Tua versus the play callers? Miami Dolphins, they've been trending in the right direction since Mike McDaniel took over as head coach for the most part, but still lost in the wild card round to Kansas City. What are we looking at for the Dolphins this offseason?
Yeah, and the Dolphins are slightly different, I think, because they haven't shown they can beat anybody in any circumstances. There are teams that have, like Buffalo, have beaten everybody they need to beat. Cincinnati have beaten everybody they need to beat. Now, not necessarily at the right time, but they've done it. They've shown that they can win those games.
Buffalo hasn't beaten Cincinnati yet. Just saying.
True. But Miami basically hasn't beaten anybody good. They've done incredibly well. They've moved in the right direction. They've been a good team, but they're in that sort of Dallas category of, but can you beat good teams? And so I don't know that you can have the same analysis as Buffalo, which is you're doing the right thing, just stay the course. Eventually you'll win one of those games. Miami, I think, does need to show that they have another level relative to some other teams like Kansas City, Buffalo, in Cincinnati, if they're back to where they belong, in crunch time. So they're also dealing with some turnover in the coaching staff. Vic Fangio mutually agreed to part ways, right? And he ended up going to Philadelphia. So they have a whole new defensive coordinator and a very different defense coming over as well.
So the Dolphins are another team. When you look at cap space itself, $50+ million
right
over the cap, they have the restructurability, obviously, to be cap compliant, but also have cap space.
They have the most restructurability of any team in the NFL in terms of dollar amount.
But per over the cap, second low, they're going to be just above the Saints in where just their possible cap space,
right,
just where they're potentially going to be going. So the Dolphins, and so the tricky part here is the Dolphins did have this element of being quote-unquote all in the last couple of years. They traded for Tyreek Hill. They traded for Jalen Ramsey, right? They made all these power moves that did make their team better. Absolutely did. But they also haven't paid their quarterback yet. Mm-hmm. So their big offseason question is, when do we pay Tua and at what price?
Right.
And again, the NFL analysis is just fascinating, right? Like after Wild Card weekend, it was like, well, Tua can't win. You can't win with that guy. And there's probably kernels of truth, and it's he hasn't shown that he could maybe compete with the big boys in the AFC, or the Dolphins haven't been able to, right? It all starts with the quarterback. At the same time, what's your alternative? That dude runs that offense extremely well. I think he's a part of it. Does the system elevate him? Sure. Does he elevate the system with his anticipation and accuracy? Yes. But yeah, when you're cold weather games and playoffs, can you go carry the team? I don't think Tua has shown that yet. So that makes it's like the Brock Purdy discussion 2 years early here. That makes it a tricky situation in Miami, because once they pay him, it makes it harder to keep that roster around him.
Yeah, it does. But critically, it probably doesn't impact them this year.
Yeah.
Like even if he signs a contract tomorrow and he becomes the best paid quarterback in the NFL, it's not until future years where that's going to become a problem with the salary cap. So they are still in this. I guess this is probably the last year, effectively, where they have the benefit of a cost control quarterback. It's not like he's dirt cheap anymore,
right,
because of how deep into that deal he is. But they have the benefit of, at least relative to Buffalo, Cincinnati, Kansas City, of a much more cost control quarterback, which is why they've been playing the New Orleans game of credit card salary cap management.
As far as replacing starters, center Connor Williams, guard Robert Hunt, both hitting free agency, depending on what you look at the left guard spot. Isaiah Wynn, we have him as a starter, but you've had a revolving door of guys like Liam Eichenberg, Robert Jones. Like a lot of guys have played, but basically interior offensive line is a need this offseason in Miami.
Right. And in fact, tackle is as well. The entire offensive line is still a need. Teron Armstead is still amazing when he plays. You have to budget in the idea that you're going to need 25% of a season from a backup left tackle, because Armstead won't play the entire year. And then the
Austin
other side,
Jackson re-signed. They brought him back, and he did improve.
But the other side is Austin Jackson, who at the very minimum is not exactly the most confidence-inspiring tackle in the NFL.
He did have the year 4 breakout, though. And so
Still wasn't great, though. I mean,
know.
the best version of Austin Jackson we've seen has been reasonable.
He's just the least of their problems now, though, which is crazy.
But, if that's the least of your problems, you've got major problems on the offensive line. It would be my point.
So they're another team that, I always suggest going to the free agent list and looking in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s on the overall list and finding some starters.
Bring them all in.
On the offensive line. I mean, isn't that the play? Connor Williams has played pretty well at center minus the snaps. They did have some snapping issues, whether it was on him or whether it was Tua, but Connor Williams took to that position switch a couple years ago for Miami and played really well up front.
Yeah, I mean, he was someone I think that had moved in that direction before he got there, but has continued to play his best football for them. So absolutely, I would try and bring him back. Absolutely, maybe they get priced out of that market, but he's a player they would, I think, really want to have back and would be he's absolutely a solid starter, but they should be hammering the mid levels of the free agent offensive line market. I mean, we're going to give every single team that needs offensive linemen Michael Owenu, but there's plenty though. Like Jonah Jackson from Detroit, if he's available and his health checks out. Josh Jones would be a really nice addition at tackle as a backup / guy that can play 6 games if you need him to when Teron Armstead's on the injury report with everything. But there's offensive linemen to be had, and they need a bunch of them.
Ezra Cleveland, I don't like when offensive linemen have grades that go down. Right, he had been a solid starter for the Vikings, and then coming off his worst year with a 59.5 grade. But I think he's got a history of playing pretty well. Kevin Dotson's our top guard on the free agent list. Another one of those guys. I don't know if the NFL matches our perception of Dotson. I mean, so from my perspective, I say go, see if you can get him on the cheap. He had been solid for Pittsburgh. They didn't love him, but we had him with the second best guard grade last year with the Rams, and so Dotson could be a potential good player there.
Yeah, Jonah Williams would be an interesting signing for them as a swing tackle / guy that can play 5-6 games for Teron Armstead when that needs to happen.
Yes.
Not good play the last couple of years, but he can start at either tackle spot if you need him to, and absolutely back up each of them. So, they need probably 3 starters in the interior and a swing tackle backup in this offseason.
I don't know schematically if Jackson Powers Johnson from Oregon, the guy that we like to give to Pittsburgh, I don't know if he fits Miami or not, but there is some comfort in that mid-first round center, and he is a good center prospect. I think he's the best since Linderbaum as far as center prospects goes. He's probably in that discussion, right? As far as prospects.
Yeah, his only red flag is injuries.
Yeah.
And quite a lot of them.
And that would fit with Miami. With all the offensive line injuries. So that's the only big risk there. Miami didn't have a first-round pick last year, and I don't know if after 2 years, if your only first-round pick is a center, if that feels great. But just something to keep an eye on there in the first round. The other part that they have to figure out, Christian Wilkins on the defensive side of the ball. As I've said a few times, there were 5 2019 interior defensive linemen that went in the first round. Quinnen Williams, Ed Oliver, Jeffrey Simmons, Christian Wilkins, and who am I missing? Dexter Lawrence. The other 4, not named Christian Wilkins, have all signed long-term deals. And I think they've signed the right long-term deals relative to their play, right? Ed Oliver's got the worst deal out of those guys. I think he's played the worst out of those guys, even though he's been solid. Christian Wilkins deserves somewhere in between Ed Oliver and then those high-end guys of Dexter Lawrence and Jeffrey Simmons. And he remains unsigned. Is he going to get tagged by Miami, come back this year? But he's the one guy that did not get that long-term deal, and he's had a pretty good, solid career as a run defender who can get after the quarterback a little bit.
Yeah, and I think they're going to end up having to franchise tag him, and that's going to squeeze them even more. I mean, okay, they have the ability to restructure a ton of money, but the point is, as soon as you have to apply the franchise tag, that is a fixed sum for that amount, guaranteed, applied to your salary cap. So the projected amount for defensive tackles is like $21 million. So if they have to franchise tag him, immediately that's another $21 million getting squeezed on that salary cap that they have to free up from somewhere else if they're going to go make moves like signing offensive linemen.
Okay, here's other reasons they're going to get squeezed. Guys that are heading into the last year of their deal or need to be re-upped soon. Jalen Waddle, I know people are talking about trading Waddle before he ends up becoming expensive. Right. Javon Holland in the secondary, and then Jalen Phillips at edge. Jalen Phillips is, when he's healthy, has become one of the better young edge defenders in the league. All of those guys need to get locked up at some point. So Miami they're really in a crunch here, trying to maintain that balance of re-signing their own, but fitting them in to all of their aggressive moves that I mentioned earlier. They went and got Jalen Ramsey and Tyreek Hill and Bradley Chubb. I mean, they've brought a lot of salary onto the team over the last couple of years. So there's going to be some turnover somewhere over the next couple of years with some of those veterans if they want to keep their younger players.
There will be. And I think there'll also be an absolute ton of restructures from some of the big contracts that they have, the big cap numbers they've got. Guys like Tyreek Hill, Jalen Ramsey, like those key pieces that are definitely staying there are going to be restructuring, freeing up a lot of money. But, they are in a squeeze. I mean, there's just no way around that. Teams that play the game like this, the salary cap game like this, Miami, New Orleans, etc. It's not that it's not foreseen or it's a surprise or it's salary cap hell, but it does mean you need to make some things happen that you wouldn't if you did it the other way around, right? Like the Saints every year go on this roster purge and clear out a bunch of players that they can't keep if they want to stay cap compliant. So Miami is going to have to get rid of some people and or make some deals that they probably wouldn't if they hadn't played the game this way.
Okay, one last thing. I'm not trying to be all doom and gloom for Miami because I'm just looking into the future, and it's going to be just really difficult keeping all these players together. I know they're going to restructure to live this year, to play. I'm just talking about the future of the Dolphins. One of the things I like to do is to reverse course and look back at how often teams drafted over the last couple of years. Dolphins this year have 6 draft picks, so below their allotted number, of course. They only drafted 4 times in 2022, 4 times in 2023. Even with the perceived lack of depth in this year's draft on day 3, at some point, to offset the fact that you can't pay everybody, you got to draft more. You have to have more cost-controlled players on your roster. So I'm suggesting this offseason, you turn 6 into 10. No matter what the depth of the draft is, they need to draft more. When you have a 3-year period where it's going to be, 14 draft picks over a 3-year period, that comes back to bite. That comes back to bite in the NFL when you have that. Some teams draft 14 times in 1 year, right? So that's going to be one of the things I'm keeping an eye on with Miami. I want to see them get younger and attack with volume, more so than I say this for other teams because of what they've done the last couple of years.
They don't have a lot of draft value in in the last couple of years, but also this year. I mean, they've got 6 picks this season, but 4 of them are on day 3, the time where we just said you don't want this is the year you don't want day 3 draft picks. So they've got a first rounder, 21 overall. They've got a second rounder, 55 overall. Everything else is round 5 and onwards. So I agree with you. I think they should try and move. Like, if they are an ideal candidate to trade out of the first round and say, look, it's great we have a first round pick. On the other hand, we desperately need more higher value draft capital. So pick number 21 is going to get turned into, an extra second, a third, or whatever.
If they could turn 21 and 53 and go from they only have 2 picks in the top 150-ish.
Right.
If they could turn that into 4 in the top 100, I think that's the way to go for future-proofing of the roster, but also for just potential immediate impact as well. But I think you have to do that given the contract situation across this roster. Mm-hmm. So do you have a take on Tua and what to do with him?
I mean, you need to. I think they have to pay him and try and get it done for as cheap a deal as they can. I mean, that's just the reality of it. You can't. I don't think you can look at what they've done and what Tua's done so far and say we can just move on from this. This is easy. Like, I can get this out of anybody. Now, even knowing the effect that offense can have on other people. The point being, aside from anything else, the biggest fan of Tua is Mike McDaniel. So that alone means they're going to be keeping him. Mike McDaniel's not looking at this and saying, between the evidence I have and the evidence of San Francisco and Brock Purdy, I can go and draft a guy in the 7th round or the 5th round, plug him in and make magic happen, and that's my new Tua for a fraction of the cost. Mike McDaniel's looking at this and saying, I had a guy that can light up the NFL, that can throw with better anticipation than anybody else, that can be one of the top 1, 2, 3 in yards per attempt, that can put up all these crazy numbers. We need to get a deal done. And yeah, that deal might be less palatable for Tua than it is for Mahomes or Josh Allen or Joe Burrow, but you got to do it. You don't really have a choice. I don't see a way you can say, nah, you're only worth $25 million a year, Tua, because we know the other things are that important. We're moving on.
One of the things I'm going to do to every mid-round every team with a mid-first round pick is give them Brock Bowers. So let's add Brock Bowers to this mix if he falls to Miami in the first round.
I thought we're trading out of the first round.
Yeah, then I want to take Bowers too. You're right. We got it. Yeah, it's 21. Yeah, he probably won't fall that far. You're right. We're going to trade down. Accumulate the picks, Miami, and franchise tag Christian Wilkins.
I mean, they're being very popularly mocked to a bunch of offensive linemen at 20. So the question really is, at 21, do you want somebody like Jackson Powers-Johnson? Do you want Troy Fontenot? Or do you want to trade out of the first round entirely and pick up extra picks?
I would rather trade down.
I think that's what they need to do.
I think there's some interior offensive line depth to be had with a couple extra picks there.
From the laminated model.
As of right. Pre-combine. It's pre-combine. Combine's going to move things all over the place.
Well, that's going to mess up the lamination.
I have a laminator. I don't have to go to Staples for this. I do it at home. We'll have a new one post-combine once the data's in.
That's the worst flex anybody's ever had.
I
don't need to go to Staples for this.
Got my own laminator. When everyone else was having a computer growing up, I had a typewriter. I was like a little behind. But I was excited to have a typewriter for a while.
Nice.
Back in the early 90s. All right, Dolphins fixed?
Yeah, I guess.